Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. I am Sayyid Akif Shah, lecturer finance at Institute of Business Studies, Kohat University of Science and Technology. The title of this course is Business Research Method, and the course code for this subject is MS312. This is lecture number 13, and the topic for today's discussion is the research process and the different steps we carry on in this process. This lecture is basically in continuity to my previous lecture, in which we have discussed the first two steps of the research process. In today's lecture, we will continue from the same position and same point where we have left in our previous discussion. Therefore, the outline of this lecture comprises of the prime focus on the second technique of getting the preliminary data gathering step, which is actually the literature review. However, in my previous lecture, we have covered the broad problem area with the help of observation. What the manager has detected was the low productivity in the organization, and the manager was interested to find out the solution to this problem. So the broad problem area once again under this lecture will remain the same, and we will continue our discussion on the next phases of preliminary data gathering, and then we will properly define the problem in a narrow span. The research process diagram is once again the same. We have discussed the observation, which is the broad problem area of the research interest. In our case, we have selected the low productivity of the organization. And then we have discussed the preliminary data gathering, which was the interviewing technique. In today's lecture, the prime focus will be on the literature survey, which is the secondary data gathering or secondary source of getting the initial data for the broad problem areas to be defined clearly in our next step. And after the completion of preliminary data gathering, the researcher is enabled and in a position to properly define the research question. The rest of the step of this research process will be discussed in the subsequent lectures. In my previous lecture, as this lecture is in continuity to the previous one, so therefore a short recap is important. We have defined the broad problem area, which was low productivity in the organization, and then discuss certain other examples like the training programs are perhaps not as effective as anticipated, could be another broad problem area for research purposes. And similarly, we have discussed a few other examples to explain the broad problem area. The next step is preliminary data gathering, in which we have briefly discussed the background information on the organization, like why a manager or a research outside agency is interested to find out the background information of the organization, information on the structure, factor, and management philosophy, and as well as perception, attitude, and behavior of the employees. So we have discussed in detail, like if the outside agency conducts the research pertaining to any organization or manufacturing company, so they might be interested in the background information because such information enabled the researchers to find the solution of the problem in a sophisticated way. Then we have discussed the structural factor and management philosophy, which will also assist the external researchers who are interested or have been hired by the top management to conduct a research on any particular issue. Like in our case, it is low productivity. And this example will continue on for our today's lecture. Similarly, they are interested in perception, attitude, and behavioral responses of the employee as well, because this also assists them to reach to the ultimate desired solution to the problem. Finally, we have discussed that the main purpose of gathering information on values, structure, and processes is that it might often reveal the root cause of the problem. The difference between the real problem and symptoms should be cleared with the help of the preliminary data gathering, with the help of interviews, which could be the structured question and as well as the unstructured interviews. After a short recap of the previous lecture, let us discuss the main agenda of this lecture, which is the literature review. Now, the manager is not only interested in the internal information, background study of the company, rather he can also go to the literature review in order to find out the potential factors which can be influencing the low productivity in the organization. So what actually the literature review is, it is a survey. Literature survey is a documentation of a comprehensive review of the published and unpublished work from secondary sources of data in the area of specific interest to the researcher. Like in our example, which is low productivity discussion in going on in a particular company. So the researcher might be interested to look at the secondary sources available over the internet, which could be published and as well as unpublished material, to find out whether the same problem has been faced by the other managers or top manager in their company around the globe. So there are multiple sources of getting the literature review, which could be the published books, where the manager can see if the same problem has been highlighted by any author. They can also check out the journal articles, academic journal articles, which are published time to time in the well-reputed academic journals like JSTOR and Emeralds, which are mostly used for social sciences, in our case as well, which is business administration. The manager can look at the newspaper for the similar problem to find out the factors which are influencing the low productivity. The secondary source may also involve the magazine study. Conference proceeding are actually the different conferences conducted where the authors and academicians discuss about the problem pertaining to any organization. So those conferences normally publish their proceedings, what they have discussed, the hot topics under discussion. The researcher might look at the doctoral dissertation of any student who have discussed the same problem, which could be the low productivity causes in the manufacturing company. The researcher can look at master thesis, government publication also available for the same problem addressed in the different public sector organizations. These all are basically the secondary sources of getting the literature review in order to find out the potential variables or the factors which are influencing low productivity in the organization. Financial reports, marketing reports, stock exchange website, and similarly the Security and Exchange Commission of Pakistan website can also help the researchers to find out the relevant data and relevant literature review. Now let us discuss what are the reasons for a researcher to look at the literature review. These are some of the important reasons because of which we actually look at the literature reviews. Now, what are those? Let's discuss those one by one. First important reason is to highlight the important variable that are likely to influence the problem situation are not left out of study. Like for example, the researcher has identified only two variables which are causing or influencing the low productivity in the organization. And there might be another third variable which has already been studied by some other researcher could be left out of the study of ours. So in order not to neglect that variable, generally the literature review helps us to find out those important variables which are influencing low productivity in the organization, as we have taken our broad problem area in this lecture or this example. The second reason of literature review is a clear idea emerge as to what variable would be most important to consider, why would be considered important, and how should they be investigated to solve the problem. So the existing body of literature or knowledge assists the researchers to find out what could be the important variables and how the different researchers or academicians or the manager who have conducted a similar nature of study in the other organizational settings and how they have solved the problem and reached towards a consensual results which could improve the productivity of the company. The third important factors is literature survey helps the development of theoretical framework and hypothesis for testing. As we are discussing the research process, and after completing the first 3 steps of research process, the next step is to develop a sound theoretical framework or a conceptual model which shows the linkages between dependent and independent variable, which sets the grounds to make the testable statements which are known as hypothesis of the study. So literature review actually helps us to develop or set the grounds for the next step, which is theoretical framework and hypothesis testing. The fourth reason is the problem statement can be made with precision and clarity. When the literature review has been conducted thoroughly and properly, your problem statement may be cleared in a concise and precise way. So we can say that the literature review actually helps us to define the problem statement in a nice and sophisticated fashion. The fifth reason for a literature review is testability and replicability of the findings of current research are enhanced. As we go through from the previous published and unpublished data on the same issue by the other researcher around the globe, therefore one of the hallmark of the scientific research is that it should be testable, and replicability of this study may be there if another researcher is going to follow the same research design. This study should give the replicable results. So when we go through from the literature review and we incorporate the important variables, therefore the testability and replicability of our research has been enhanced, and it sets the ground for our research to be called as a scientific study. The sixth reason for a literature review is one does not run the risk of reinventing the wheel, that is, wasting efforts on trying to discover something that is already known. Now, what is the meaning of reinventing the wheel? Like, already wheel has been invented by someone. If once again somebody may spend number of years on how to invent a wheel once again, and he has been wasting his time and efforts on the same mechanism or same problem which has already been cleared by somebody else. So therefore, if you are using or you are trying to find out the solution to the same problem which has been highlighted and solved by some other researchers, and it has given you a clear guideline how to tackle such problem, and you are wasting your time on finding the solution to a similar nature of problem existing in your organization, then you are going to reinvent the wheel. So this should be avoided. In order to avoid reinventing the wheel, one should go through the literature review in a thorough fashion so that the existing body of literature or knowledge should not be ignored and reinvented. Last but not the least, the problem investigated is perceived by the scientific community as a relevant and significant. When you go through from the existing bodies of literature by studying books, journal, and internet digital library sources, you actually get the knowledge of the different scientific communities who have already discussed the same problem in different contexts, in different countries, and in different scenarios. So it actually helps you to investigate in a more scientific and significant fashion. So these are some of the reasons which are really important for researchers to go through and make a solid, systematic, and proper literature review before delving himself into a problem situation. This literature review will help you to find out or figure out the important variables which are influencing or having impact on the desired problem situation, which in our case is once again the low productivity. So after going through from the literature review, the manager will be able to highlight the important factors which might influence the low productivity in the organization. Now let us discuss how a researcher can conduct the literature survey. These are threefold. Number first is identifying the relevant sources. There are three kinds of sources available for a researchers to go through, which is bibliographic databases. It actually includes the bibliographic citation, that is the name of the authors, title of the articles or books, sources of publication, year, volume, and the page numbers. So it actually gives you only the references of the relevant material already published by someone. The second source is the abstract databases. This database actually gives you the short summary or the abstracts of the already published material. And third, full text databases gives you the complete and full text of the research article or the research publication which has been conducted by different researchers around the globe. These full text databases may include like ScienceDirect, JSTOR, and other digital databases like Web of Science and Google Scholars. From these full text databases, what researchers do is to download the relevant published material which is pertinent to the existing problem encountered by the manager in his company, which is low productivity in our case. The second step in conducting the literature survey is extracting the relevant information. From this published and unpublished print and electronic media, researcher can extract the relevant information pertaining to their problem situation. And in the third step, the researcher write up the literature review in a logical fashion. By logically, we mean that the researcher or the writer may link the variables with each other in a logical fashion and with proper arguments. Second point need to bear in mind is to properly cite the material you are using in the literature review write-up. What is citation? I will make a complete lecture on this citation and the style of citation. In the next series of lectures, you will have the lecture on the citation techniques. For the time being, you should be aware that while writing the literature review or using the variables and knowledge of the previous researchers, by rule you are required to cite or give reference to the particular variables or the paragraph or the contextual relationship you are using in the research of yours. You are required to give proper reference of that statement, arguments, or the theory in your write-up. Thirdly, you must use a specific style of references, which could be APA, which is American Psychological Association, and MLA, like Modern Languages Association. In social sciences and business studies, normally we use APA style of referencing. While writing the literature survey, one has to adopt one particular specimen or the style of referencing, and your complete document must consist of the same style of referencing. After completing the literature review and the interviewing, the researcher is in a position to narrow down the problem from its original broad base and define the issue of concern more clearly. We can define any situation. Now we are in a position, the researcher is in a position to find out the gap between actual and desired ideal state, and to differentiate between the symptom of problems which must not be defined as the real problems. So at this step, after a thorough study of interviewing and literature review, the researcher is able to clearly define the research definition of problem. In our case, the broad problem area was to investigate the low productivity. Let's say that the manager was looking to solve the issue of low productivity, and he has increased the financial benefits and the salary increase to the workers, and of the opinion that this financial benefit may increase the productivity of the workers, but he might be wrong in the judgment of the real problem. So a researcher must be clear about what is the real problem, what are the symptoms, what is the consequence, and what is antecedent. So this was actually the consequence, which is the low productivity in the organization. And there might be some real problem which is influencing towards the low productivity of the workers, which could be low motivation level and low morale. When the motivation level and morale of the employees or workers are low, it will definitely leads towards the low productivity. And what are the reasons behind the low motivation and morale of the employees or workers? There must be some antecedent. And the antecedents which is furnishing grounds towards the low morale and motivation level could be the non-recognitions of employees' contribution in the organization. So the researcher must define the problem concisely and precisely and clearly. And the literature review and interviewing the organizational employees may assist the researchers to find out what are symptoms, what are antecedent, and what is real problem, and what is the consequence. Only then the researcher may be able to solve the problem. So the actual antecedent which was furnishing grounds to the real problem was the non-recognition of the employee's contribution. When the employee's contribution or the work has not been recognized by the top management, their motivation level and morale ultimately decreased while working in the organization. So when the motivation level of the workers decrease, it will lead towards the low productivity in their work environment. So the final conclusion is the employees are recognized for their work, their motivation level and morale will not improve, nor will their productivity as a consequence. So the main focus of the researcher might be on the recognition of the employee's contribution, which will enhance or increase the motivation level of the employee, and ultimately the productivity of the company will enhance. Now let us discuss some of the example of well-defined problems. A problem statement which is considered as a well-defined could look like a complete narration, which could be like, to what extent has the new advertisement campaign been successful in creating the high quality, customer-centered corporate image that it was intended to produce. Now this is a well-defined problem that the researcher is looking to find out the impact of the new advertisement campaign on the high quality, customer centered corporate image of the company. Another example could be, which is quite simple, how has the new packaging affected the sale of the product? Like if the company may change the packaging of the existing product, does it have an impact on the increase or decrease of the sale of that specific product? When the company may change the packages and the product sale has been increased, so it means that there is a direct relationship between good packaging and the sale of the product. So this is now a clear, well-defined problem which can be investigated in any organization or manufacturing company. Another example could be, does better automation leads to the greater asset investment per dollar of output? It means that if there are more computerized system and less human efforts during the transition or manufacturing process, does it have a greater per dollar of output of the investment? The finance student can clearly or easily understand this issue. Another well-defined problem could be, what are the effects of downsizing on the long-range growth pattern of the company? If the company is going to downsize, it means to decrease the number of employees working in the organization. Now, this decision will have, what type of impact this decision will have on the long-range growth pattern of the company? Either the company will grow with downsizing, or it will decrease. There will be decrease in the growth of the company by, if they are taking the decision of downsizing. So such kind of statements are known as well-defined problems. The last agenda of this lecture is the ethical issues in the preliminary stages of investigation, which we have completed the 3 stages of a scientific research. So the ethical dilemma must be, or it could be, that it is necessary to inform all the employees, particularly those who will be interviewed for the preliminary data gathering, through structured and unstructured interview of the proposed study. It means that the employees of the organization must be acquainted with the research activities going on in the organization, so that they feel relaxed, and then they also can easily cooperate with the research team if those are outsider to the company. So the ethical issue is that the employee must not be unaware of the research activity going on in their organization. Secondly, it is also necessary to assure the employees of the company that whatever the researcher is asking from them with the help of structured and unstructured interviews, the responses will be kept confidential, and those responses will not be divulged. It means that they are not going to be public to anyone in the organization or outside the organization. It means that it is ethical to inform all the employees, and as well as give them guarantee and a surety that their responses on the problem situation, what they are answering to the interviewer in this research project, will be kept totally confidential, and nobody will be informed about who has replied what kind of answer to a particular question. So this was all about the research process, initial 3 steps, and particularly the literature review and its importance and reasons, and as well as the ethical dilemma. Thank you very much for listening to this lecture. If you have any question, feel free to ask. Good luck for the day. Allah Hafiz.